The Marine Corps has been operating the V-22 transport aircraft for more than 30 years. And for more than 30 years, the Marines have been dealing with crashes, sometimes deadly ones. The vertical lift machine has killed 60 people so far. The cycle of accidents, groundings, and returns to flight continues to this day. My next guest did detailed analysis of the data connected to the V-22. Brad Dress, a reporter for the Hill newspaper, joins me now. Brad, good to have you with us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And what prompted this look at the V-22 in such detail? I mean, hasn't the Pentagon looked at it enough already?
Yeah, there's been a long history with this aircraft. You know, the military really values it. It's a hybrid aircraft called a tilt rotor. It takes off like a helicopter and can fly like a plane. So, you know, the military has always sort of seen this as valuable for, you know, flying in unique missions, but it has a long and troubled history of crashing. And even before, when it was being developed, there was a lot of problems with the development and with the cost of the aircraft. But, you know, as soon as it debuted in, you know, early 1990s, you know, it crashed, and it's continued to crash, and it's led to a lot of concern from, you know, service members and families of victims, of service members who died in some of these crashes. So it really is something that remains unresolved, and they're still trying to understand exactly why it keeps crashing.
And it sounds like there's a treasure trove of research and data and so forth connected with this particular crash propensity of this plane, this transport.
Yeah, so what I did, I looked at some of the history of this aircraft and some of the data behind the crashes, including crash rate data, which really points to a fact that the aircraft has crashed a bit more than other similar aircraft, like large helicopters like the Chinook or the Black Hawk. So, you know, there are different factors you can look at and filter through, but the Air Force has this data on their website, and it does show that the Class A mishap rate, which are like severe accidents, are generally higher for the Osprey. And the Osprey actually has less flight hours than some of these other aircraft. So when you start comparing this data, you do see that there is a troubling history here. The data alone is not conclusive, though, and there definitely needs to be a lot more research done, I think, in this space to really understand, because I still think a lot of people they don't know exactly why it keeps crashing, and is there something that can be done to stop these crashes? They don't know. So there's still a lot that they're trying to understand here.
And you found that there is no one single cause. That would kind of make it simple, I guess, if they knew exactly why these things crash. But there's multiple reasons, correct?
Yes, that's correct. I looked at this pattern of crashes, and there's multiple different problems that have come up throughout the years. I think the biggest one is hard clutch engagement. It's when the clutch disengages and then re-engages. That's been something that they've been studying for the past few years, you know, or longer, because they've identified that as a problem in several of these crashes, including a 2022 crash in California. That was listed as the primary reason for that crash, and I actually spoke with family members of some of the Marines who died in that crash. And some of those family members have actually filed a lawsuit against the manufacturers of the Osprey. That includes that's Boeing and Bell Textron and Rolls-Royce, which makes the engines. And they say that there's been known problems with this aircraft that just haven't been resolved. And specifically with the clutch problem, later this year, in the spring of this year, we're going to see Bell has identified a part that they're going to be fixing that may solve this
Sure.
HC hard clutch engagement problem. So part of the lawsuit is like, well, how long have they known about that, and could this fix have been adopted sooner?
We're speaking with Brad Dress. He's a reporter for The Hill. And this clutch issue, is that when it goes from vertical to horizontal flight? Is that when that problem occurs?
It's essentially when it's switching power over between the engines. So it's really complex to get into. But when you engage the clutch, it's supposed to be switching the power. There are two engines that are working in the aircraft, and sometimes when one of them fails, the clutch should be switching to the other engine. In many cases, we're seeing that's not happening.
So engine failure then, besides the clutch, would seem to be an issue if they constantly have an engine going out.
Yeah, they haven't identified exactly why there's been engine failure in some of these cases. There's been a range of different reasons in the past. Some of them have been like pilot error, or at least that's what the mishap reports have identified, or there's been some something physically happening to some physical collision or something of that sort that's been affecting the aircraft. But in any sense, the clutch problem is not working as intended. And they've also identified that a lot of these parts are supply chain issues. A lot of these parts, and some of them are like failing, or they're like weak or much weaker than they should be. That includes these metal alloys from a company called Universal Stainless. And so they don't know, they're still trying to study exactly why some of these parts are failing, but it is at least something that has been identified in the past as another issue.
And it's difficult to get along without them. There's several hundred of them in the fleet, and it's central to their operations, fair to say?
Yes, the Marines really highly value this. It's not just flown by the Marines, it's also flown by the Air Force, their special operations, and also the Navy. So there's a lot of these Ospreys out there, and despite all these concerns, including the last deadly crash was November 2023 in Japan, near Japan, which killed 8 airmen. That led to a grounding of the fleet, but only temporarily. And now they've lifted that again, and we expect that they'll be flying this in full force by the spring of 2025. So they've acknowledged some of the problems with the Osprey, but the Marines in particular have been very defensive of the aircraft.
Brad Dress is a reporter for The Hill. Thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And we'll post this interview along with a link to his latest story at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.